For decades, there's been this one simple, powerful story that has totally shaped how millions of us think about depression. It's a story so common it feels like a fact, something we learned in school or heard in a doctor's office. But what if that whole story is a myth?
You've definitely heard this before, right? The idea that depression is just a deficiency of a brain chemical, usually serotonin. And it's such a neat, elegant explanation. It's dominated the conversation for a generation, and it gave us a really clear reason for the most common treatments.
Because that's the thing. A massive scientific review recently dropped, and it has sent absolute shockwaves through the world of psychiatry. Today, we're going to break down the evidence that's challenging one of the most influential narratives in modern medicine.
So yeah, this whole conversation really hit a turning point in the summer of 2022. It all came down to the publication of a single, really powerful study. But this wasn't just any study.
Okay, so what even is an umbrella review? Think of it like this. It's a review of reviews. It sits at the very, very top of the evidence pyramid. So instead of looking at one-off experiments, it pulls together the findings from decades of the best research out there. That gives its conclusions an incredible amount of scientific weight.
And this is the paper we're talking about. It was published in a super prestigious peer-reviewed journal, Molecular Psychiatry. The review, led by a psychiatrist named Joanna Moncrief, set out to do one thing: to systematically look at all the evidence for the serotonin theory of depression.
All right, so what happened? What did they find when they put this decades-old theory under the most powerful scientific microscope we have? And look, the researchers were incredibly thorough. They didn't just look at one type of evidence. No, they went after this from every possible angle. They looked at studies measuring serotonin directly in body fluids. They looked at the serotonin transporters. That's the SERT gene that's supposed to recycle serotonin. They even looked at studies where they intentionally lowered people's serotonin to see if it would cause depression. I mean, it was comprehensive.
And the results? Well, they were just stark. Across all these different ways of looking at the problem, the conclusion was pretty much the same. There was just no solid evidence that people with depression had lower serotonin. In fact, when they tried to artificially lower serotonin in healthy people, it didn't cause depression. And get this is wild. Some evidence even suggested that long-term use of antidepressants might actually, over time, lower serotonin levels. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about here, look at this number. One of the huge genetic studies they analyzed included data from over 115,000 people. That is a massive sample size, big enough to spot even tiny effects with a lot of confidence.
So after all that, what did this giant genetic study find? Absolutely no link. The gene that controls the main target for SSRI antidepressants showed no connection to depression. The genetic proof just wasn't there.
So here it is, straight from the researchers themselves. After digging through decades of research from every possible angle, they concluded there is just no consistent, convincing evidence to support the idea that depression is caused by low serotonin.
Okay, so this obviously raises a huge question. If the science was so weak this whole time, how in the world did this chemical imbalance story become, common knowledge? Well, the thing is, the popularity of this idea didn't really grow alongside scientific discoveries, not at all. Its rise to fame started in the late 80s and 90s, which, what a coincidence, is right when Prozac and other SSRIs hit the market. And then it just exploded after 1997, which is when drug companies were legally allowed to start advertising directly to people like you and me. It was a simple, powerful story for marketing.
And boy, did that message get out there. A recent study actually asked people where they first heard the chemical imbalance theory. As you can see, the number one source was school or a class. Number two, the internet and media. But check out that third bar, healthcare providers.
And this is the crucial part. While the idea was kind of just floating around everywhere, the study found one thing that made it really stick: hearing the theory from a healthcare provider. A trusted authority like a doctor or a therapist. That was the single biggest factor in whether a person actually believed it was true.
So, all of this leaves us in a really interesting and kind of tricky spot. If the whole serotonin theory is on shaky ground, what does that actually mean for treating depression? Where do we go from here?
Right, and this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's the central paradox. Millions and millions of people are prescribed these drugs that boost serotonin, and for some people, they are genuinely, life-changingly helpful. So how do we square that? How can the theory be wrong, but the drugs still seem to work?
Well, what's happening now is that the scientific conversation is totally shifting. That old, simple story of just fixing a deficit
It's being replaced with these newer, way more complex ideas. For example, some scientists think these drugs might work by promoting something called neurogenesis, that's literally the growth of new brain cells. Others think they might have an anti-inflammatory effect on the brain. Or maybe they just gradually change how our brains process emotion, kind of numbing the bad stuff so we can form new, healthier patterns.
Okay, and let's be absolutely 100% clear on this point. This is so important. Challenging the serotonin theory is not the same as saying antidepressants don't work. For many people, they do. What this new research suggests is that our explanation for why they work was just a massive oversimplification. They seem to be effective just through different, more complicated ways that we're still trying to figure out.
And that's really where this leaves all of us. If we move past that simple, tidy, but as we've seen, unsupported idea of a chemical imbalance, what comes next? It forces us to face the true complexity of depression. And it pushes all of us, patients, doctors, and scientists, to have a much more honest and nuanced conversation about what really causes this suffering and how we can best find our way through it.